I am Allison, Ranger Allison Schaup, and my job is to manage the education program here at Joshua Tree. So since you all are high school students, I'm going to do kind of a mix of one of our normal introduction to Joshua Tree programs, which generally we do for elementary school kids. I'll do kind of some general stuff, show you some plants. We'll go outside here in a second on the actual field trip part. And then I can talk about some career things, kind of how my path took me here to California. I'm originally from Virginia and went to school out in Virginia. And then at that point, we'll take questions. But all right, so Greensburg, Indiana, you guys are kind of close to the border of Ohio, right?
Oh yeah, wow, you looked us up.
I did. I got to make sure I can relate to the people, right? So Greensburg is kind of, I think it's right kind of where that A is.
You are correct.
So where you are, you're probably maybe 2.5, 3 days from California. So you're going to hop in a car here. I assume many of you have licenses. You're going to take the boring highway across the flyover states. Don't tell them I said that. And then we're going to end up here in Southern California. So California is a huge state. Lost you guys for a second. California, and just a warning, I may lose internet and I'll hop on the meeting as soon as I can. It's a little touch and go up where I am.
Sure.
California is an enormous state. You know, if you compare the size of California to the East Coast, you're going basically from like New York all the way down to Florida. And when we're talking about national park sites in California, there's a bunch. You know, there's the iconic Yosemite National Park, which is kind of in the northern middle part of the state. You got Redwoods, which is, where's Redwoods? We're here, Death Valley's pretty cool. Let's see, and then Channel Islands, which is pretty neat. They have an endemic fox out there, which is kind of cool to learn about. And then Joshua Tree's down here, really close to the southern border of Mexico. We're probably like an hour and a half, maybe 2-hour drive from the border. And we are split between the Mojave Desert and the Colorado Desert. Colorado Desert is a branch of the Sonoran Desert, and you know the Sonoran Desert as the place where those big, funky saguaro cactus exist, right? That look like the weird green people standing up in the desert. We do not have those type of cactus here. Those cactus are pretty much only found, I think, in Arizona, maybe a little bit into New Mexico. But when you look at a map of Joshua Tree National Park, it is huge. It is 800,000 acres. That is the size of the state of Rhode Island. We have 3 million people visiting this park annually. And we have probably less than 100, during the busiest time of the year, less than 100 staff operating all of that. So imagine if you had 100 state officials managing the government of the state of Rhode Island. Kind of pathetic, right? Mm-hmm. The one thing that we have to our benefit, though, is that most of what you're seeing in this map is wilderness. And wilderness is designated by Congress. It's an area of land where there's really strong restrictions as to what you can do in wilderness. It's limited to traditional movement. So walking and horseback is the only thing you can do in a wilderness area. If you have a building out in a wilderness area, like a building that we have to do maintenance on, for example, a historic building, we have to take materials out there by horseback, or we could helicopter it in, but we cannot take vehicles out into a wilderness area. So really strong restrictions in wilderness, but you know, wilderness exists. Even if you never make it to wilderness, a lot of people find solace in the fact that you can still find places in the middle of nowhere, even in Southern California, one of the most heavily populated parts of the country. So symbols, brands, you guys all know brands, right? Can anybody hot mic in and tell me some of the more famous, more common brands that you're familiar with?
Nike.
And their symbols. And what's the symbol for Nike?
The little check mark.
The arrow, right? Nike is the goddess of speed or flight or something like that. And the check mark kind of gives you that feeling of like moving really fast or flying. What else? How about Amazon? We're all familiar with Amazon right now. What's the Amazon symbol look like?
A smiley face.
It's a smiley face, right? Well, it's a curved arrow that looks like a smiley face because we're all happy when we get packages. And the arrow with the, the pointer or whatever you want to call it, again, gives us that sense of speediness. You're going to get your packages fast. Any others? Is there a third one that might stick out? Which one that has I can't think of one right now that has a lot of meaning. McDonald's, the Golden Arches, but I can't remember where that came from, where the M came. I mean, obviously M for McDonald's, but there's more to that story. Well, anyway, brands, branding, logos have heavy meaning to them. They're instantly recognizable. And the National Park Service has our own logo, which we spent many years on. It has remained actually relatively unchanged since probably the 20s or 30s, early onset of the National Park Service and the National Park System. We all wear it on our sleeve. Do I have it on my hat? I don't have it on this hat. I have it on my baseball hat. But it's this, what we call the, well, we'll figure out. We'll work together to figure out what this means. So who would like to pick an image on this branding, this logo, and tell me what it means? I'll give you a hint. I live in the desert. A lot of things on this logo do not exist in the desert, but they're representative, right? What is that animal?
Answer, please.
A bison.
We all knew this, honor students. Yes, it's a bison, or more commonly known as a buffalo. If you want to go scientific, what class is this? What subject is this, Mr. Pratt?
History.
History, okay. So the bison is iconic to the national park system. First national park, Yellowstone National Park, was designed to protect the last wild herd of bison in the United States because of the epic, essentially murdering of all the bison to pretty much subdue Native Americans to the newly established reservations in the late 1800s. Bison have since made a huge comeback. They're found in a lot of places. We can eat them, the people can ranch them. They're delicious. They're also very cool to watch in natural areas. But do we have bison in the desert? We do not. No. They're huge animals. They're multiple thousand-pound animals. But because that animal is so iconic, particularly to the establishment of national parks, we use that symbol to represent all of the animals found in many National Park Service sites. This tree, we have a tree this big in Joshua Tree National Park, again in the desert, where we don't have a lot of water. We do not. So this is a sequoia, a giant sequoia tree. Again, another a plant found in California, only in California. And that giant sequoia tree represents all plants. The reason why Joshua Tree National Park was formed, to protect plants. We have the mountains with the snow, which we actually got snow last week, 2 weeks ago.
Wow.
There was snow up here, and there's a mountain. We're not going to be able to see it from where I am, but there's a mountain, Mount San Gorgonio, that still has snow on it, which is really cool to see from the desert. And that melted snow in the lake down here represents the water sites that we protect, like Lake Mead in Arizona, Nevada, National Seashores. Let's see, in Indiana, you have Indiana Dunes National Lakeshores. Anybody ever been up to Indiana Dunes?
Absolutely.
I've never been there, but I've seen pictures and it looks pretty cool.
It is.
And then what else am I missing? What am I not talking about with this logo?
The arrowhead.
The arrowhead, exactly. So the National Park Service doesn't just protect natural things. And usually that's what we tend to think of, right? We think of Yellowstone and they have the geysers and the really cool geology up there. We think of Sequoia or the Redwoods National Parks, and we think of the giant trees. Joshua Tree, it's in the name, Joshua Tree National Park. But many national parks are dedicated to the stories of the people who lived in a particular area, or the stories of how people came to this country. We have lots of Native American sites within these national parks, these larger national parks. So we wanted to make sure we include the human side of the National Park Service with the shape, which is an arrowhead. So for example, I used to work in South Dakota at Badlands National Park. That was all part of the Great Sioux Reservation, the Great Lakota Reservation. And you learn a lot about Native Americans up there. It's bordering the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, so you learn a lot about the cultural livelihood of Native Americans then and today. We have that here as well in Joshua Tree National Park. We have 15 tribes, 15 different desert tribes affiliated with the park. And they continue to live and thrive both in Palm Springs, right down the hill from where I am, and other areas surrounding the entire Coachella Valley surrounding the park, and the Morongo Valley where I live. So we want to make sure we're all inclusive of these stories. You know, there's a Stonewall National Historic Site in New York City was our first LGBTQ site, and that site was dedicated within the last, I can't remember when that was dedicated, but it's been very recent. We have jazz music. You can go down to New Orleans and learn about jazz music at New Orleans Jazz National Historic Site. There are just a lot of really cool places, over 430 places actually, that you can visit and learn about all these different bits of history, bits of natural history, cultural history of the United States. So that is what I am tasked with, and my job is to learn about all this stuff and to be able to kind of convey the reasons why we think they're so important to afford protection through the national park system. So I am in a really boring office right now. Let's go walk outside and take a look at the desert. What I would like you guys to do, I'm going to pretend you're fourth graders. I would like you to close your eyes and imagine what a desert looks like to you. I'm going to take this hat off and put my baseball hat on so it doesn't blow off in the wind outside. And I'm going to turn the camera off for a second and venture on outside. So actually, I'm just going to cover up the camera with my finger so that you guys don't get nauseous from all the walking. All right, so remember, or get a mental picture of what a desert looks like. Remember, I said we are in the Mojave Desert. Oh, I got my sunglasses here. The Mojave Desert is a really different type of desert than probably what you're used to thinking about. Deserts are defined by nothing more than the amount of rain that they get. So any desert receives that distinction as a desert because it receives annually less than, I think it's like 6 inches, maybe 4 inches. So here we go. That's me. Let me turn the camera around here. Here is the Mojave Desert. So there's a Joshua Tree in the distance. The very near distance, we'll go up and explore that. Please ignore the giant gas tank. I am in a campground, so you can actually come and camp amongst all of this stuff. And this is actually one of the areas with probably the more dense concentration of Joshua trees in the park. So what I would like to do, well, first of all, is anybody surprised at what you see? When you had your own mental idea of what a desert looks like? What is different?
There's a lot more greenery.
A lot more plants, right? Really hard to expect this many plants. I mean, even off in the distance in what we would define as a desert. So the Mojave Desert is really special. It is a high elevation desert. So we are slightly above 4,000 feet right now. which means you will hear me when we start to walk up this tiny little hill. Hear me breathe heavily because I have a hard time walking and talking, even having lived here for 5 years. But because we are at such a high elevation, we do receive a lot more rainfall than your average desert. In addition, well, strike that, not rainfall, but precipitation. We get snow, and we often get a couple feet of snow at least once a year. Last year, the day after Christmas, we got 2 feet of snow. And what you're seeing at right now, the snow was up here for probably a solid 2 weeks, which is really cool. At my house, it lasted for a day, so we were able to sled. I have 2 children, a 4th grader and a kindergartner this year. And let's see the bird that just flew up there. So we actually were able to go sledding in our front yard for a little bit. Let's go up and take a look at this Joshua tree. I'm going to cover up the camera again so that nobody gets nauseous as I walk. And you'll hear me kind of crunch through. You know, our soil is very sandy, but it's also really rocky. So it's not like the soft sand you would see at a beach or what you might think of in the Sahara. But it's still pretty crunchy. We haven't had rain. Well, we had a little bit of rain a couple of weeks ago, but things are still pretty dead and dormant for the winter time. Okay, so here is the close-up of a trunk of a Joshua tree.
Oh, wow.
Oh. Very different than the trees you have out there, right?
Oh, yeah.
So as we go up the Joshua tree, you can start to see the source of all those dead needles from the live green needles. So the Joshua tree is related to the yucca. And there's a yucca right next door here. So this plant with this, where's my finger there? This plant here with the spiky tips, that's a Mojave yucca. Much wider leaves, much longer leaves, closer to the ground. The Joshua tree, however, is significantly taller. That's why it's known as a tree, mainly because of its height. There's nothing else tree-like about this. There are no tree rings in the trunk of a Joshua tree. Therefore, we cannot tell the age of Joshua trees. Not only are there no tree rings, but they will grow more robust during wet years and be dormant during dry years. So because they have really inconsistent growth, it's just next to impossible to give you an age of a tree, of a Joshua tree. Now, the green leaves, so the name of a Joshua tree was given when Mormon pioneers first came through the Southern California desert and saw these. The Joshua tree is endemic to the Mojave Desert. So if you see a Joshua tree, you're in the Mojave Desert, and the Mojave Desert only exists in this part of California, part of Nevada, a little bit into Utah, and I think a tiny little chunk of Arizona. So this is the only place where you will see Joshua trees in the United States. Most of Joshua Tree National Park is actually not covered by Joshua trees. A very small part of Joshua Tree National Park contains Joshua trees. Oh, the wind is kicking in there. So the name Joshua Tree comes from Mormon pioneers who saw the tree and it looked like its branches were extended toward the sun, kind of like their patron saint, Joshua, extending his arms upward toward the heavens. And if we look off to the distance, you can kind of see how the Joshua trees bend southerly. They all kind of tend a little more southern toward the southern horizon in the direction of the sun. They have very stiff leaves to help prevent moisture evaporation from the needles so that they can survive the hot desert or the hot summer sun. It can get 114 degrees plus up here in the summertime, even above 4,000 feet. They also have a shape and a direction when they're living, the leaves, to direct water down into the trunk where it then trickles down to the ground. So Joshua trees have a very narrow, a very shallow root system, but it's very wide. It can extend out maybe 5, usually less than 10 feet from the base of the tree, but if they're like pencils. So if you have a pencil around, look at the thickness of the pencil that you have, your pencil or pen. That is the thickness of a Joshua tree. So Joshua trees they're not very stable. They blow over really easily in high winds. We get a lot of high winds out here. And if one gets blown over, the bottom where the roots are, it actually looks like a mop, like one of those old school yarn mops that you see, you know, at school, right? So they're designed to enlarge the surface area that the roots have to absorb moisture. So the roots are really small but very numerous, so that there's more surface area under the ground to get that moisture that often only soaks a couple inches into the ground. And then the dead leaves lay against the trunk itself for two reasons. They form like a sun protection, so it the trunk itself is like a big sponge. So underneath here, you can kind of, well, actually it's really hard to get in and even see where the actual trunk is. You can kind of see it at the bottom. Oh, the shadow keeps getting in the way. But looking at the needles, these are all dead needles that have lain against the side of the trunk. It helps prevent direct sun from evaporating moisture out of the tree, but it also prevents the moisture from inside of the tree from freezing. Because we do get snow, because the temperatures can get below freezing, if you have a living plant, and you guys are familiar with this, I'm sure when it gets cold, your parents or any adults are probably covering up their plants outside so that they don't freeze. Water is the main part of a plant cell. Water is also the only material in the universe that we know of that actually expands when it freezes instead of shrinking. So a living object, a living material that freezes, its cell wall will burst, the cells will die, and then that tissue will eventually die. That's what frostbite is, and plants can die that way as well. So this adaptation of the leaves actually staying on the tree when they die is a really fantastic way to help this tree survive the harsh summers and winters of the Mojave Desert. And I don't know if you can see, but there's little black tips on those needles. So if we walk over to, there used to be a little baby Joshua tree over here, but maybe the rabbits ate it. I don't see it right now. Oh, here it is. There's a little baby Joshua tree. See that itty bitty guy down there? Oh gosh, where is it? It's very pokey. I don't want to hurt myself because I will. Where's my, there it is, right there. So baby Joshua trees often grow beneath what we call nurse plants. So this plant above here is going to protect that Joshua tree as it gets bigger and bigger. And we can see from this Joshua tree, it's actually well overgrown its nurse plant. That plant that looks dead is very beautiful in the springtime. It has these really kind of sage green leaves, and then those spikes coming out, those stems coming out of the top have these really cool yellow flowers on it. You are seeing this in probably the least colorful time of the year. So let's, then I'll show this guy here. So this is called blackbush. And let's see, if I get really close, I don't know if you guys can see the leaves on this plant, but they're super, super teeny tiny. Let me put some in my hand here. Super teeny tiny, where is it? Leaves. There's one right there.
Yep.
And again, that is an adaptation. So this plant is not dead. It looks dead, it's just dormant. But those teeny tiny leaves are, again, another adaptation to prevent moisture loss from that plant. So big broad leaves, like what you guys have in Indiana, those plants are going to respirate more. There's going to be more moisture leaving the plant, but there's also more moisture in annual rainfall. So that moisture loss through the leaves is replaced by moisture intake through the roots. Here we don't have that. So another adaptation some of these plants have, another leaf adaptation is to just have really teeny, teeny, tiny leaves. So they're still getting photosynthesis and food, but they're just not losing the moisture quickly like they might through a broadleaf shape. So let's go over here to the yucca. So this is the cousin of the Joshua tree. This does not grow, these plants don't grow as tall as Joshua trees, but their leaves are much wider, and you can really see the curvature and how that might funnel water down into the trunk. Really cool. And these are super stiff. So a yucca plant is actually an incredibly useful plant for Native Americans. It's called soapweed as well. You could dig up the roots, mash them and boil them, and they form a soap-like substance that could be used for cleaning yourself or other things. The leaves have these threads here. See these fibers kind of coming off the leaf? I don't know if you can see, yeah, you can see some of them hanging off. Those fibers were pulled off carefully from each of those leaves, and it could be woven into a mat that could be like a sandal bottom or a basket or something like that. And then this is the remainder of an old flower stalk. This shoots this like 5-foot stalk out of the center of the flower when it's blooming in springtime. And those early blossoms were edible. The early blossoms and the early fruits were edible. We don't really eat those now, they're kind of flavorless. But it's a really useful plant. And again, you have the dead leaves laying against the trunk, serving the same purpose as the Joshua tree. So I want to show you some of our cactus, because the cactus are actually kind of cool. I mean, I'm not a plant person, but the diversity of cactus is really neat. So the first cactus we'll look at is this one. This is called hedgehog cactus. So its needles look kind of like the spines on a hedgehog, right? Kind of similar in color. And hedgehog cactus, what is really neat about cactus is that these spines are actually a modified leaf. Although the spines don't photosynthesize like most leaves we think of, the body of the plant photosynthesizes. And when you have a ton of needles like that, especially long needles like this hedgehog cactus, they form shade. They create shade. And that shade is another way of preventing moisture loss in a desert plant. So that's another adaptation that helps these plants survive the desert. Otherwise, they're also protective against, rabbits and other animals that might eat them because they are so full of moisture. Clearly, only something stupid and living like myself backing into one of these is going to, mess around with a hedgehog cactus. But they're pretty cool. And these guys have really, really pretty like red flowers in the spring. And like other cactus, the fruits are edible, but usually when we think of eating cactus fruit, that is a prickly pear cactus, which we have prickly pear, I just don't have any here to show you on my little hillside. I'm going to show you for comparison this cactus, which is called a beaver tail, right? Looks like little beaver tails. Scientists are pretty obvious with a lot of their naming strategies. But do you see cactus spines on this, like the hedgehog? Does this even have spines? It totally does. And they're totally weird. If you, let me zoom in here. See those little fuzzy wads of whatever on top of that? So those little fuzzy wads, those are the cactus spines. They're called glockids. Let me see this one right here. It might be a little bit easier to see. They're called glockids, Gloccids. And they are more for defense purposes than for shade, obviously, on this plant, although they do help with a little bit of shade. Instead of all the spines casting shade on this cactus now, it has all those wrinkles. So you know how our brains have wrinkles the more wrinkles we have, the smarter we are. I believe that's how the brain works. The wrinkles actually allow us to hold more, I don't know, neurons. I'm not a biologist. Maybe I'm not, I'm just talking stuff I don't know, sorry. But all these wrinkles in this beaver tail cactus help provide shade for the cactus. So even though some of these cactus pads look, some of them are totally dead, there's some dead ones there. A lot of these will shrink up and almost look completely dried out. And then when it rains, they'll absorb a ton of water and be nice and fat little cactus pads again. This cactus has beautiful hot pink flowers on it in the springtime. It's pretty incredible. And desert tortoise love eating that. And then the last cactus I'll show you is my least favorite. I hate this cactus. We have some in our neighbor's yard. It's the worst cactus ever. Its common name is teddy bear cholla, Cholla. It is the opposite of a teddy bear though. So from a distance, it looks nice and cozy, right? You want to pet it. But when you get up nice and close, it is covered with these cactus spines that are kind of like Velcro. And that allows the plant to reproduce. It catches on to wildlife and then gets dropped off somewhere else, and a new plant grows from those bunches of spines that got, carried. The problem with this is that wind also blows these. Here's some loose cactus spines here. You guys see that? I could barely touch that and it would stick onto my finger, or my dog, where it has often carried them into the house, get stuck in the carpet and then we step on them. So this is why I hate this cactus. It is very well adapted to the wind in the desert. That's what allows it to reproduce. But that adaptation is the bane of my existence, especially when we have these in my neighbor's yard. So let's go on down. Does anybody have any questions about cactus? As you're looking at the cactus, I'll show you some more. So off in the distance is the largest Marine Corps base in the world. The 29 Palms Marine Air Ground Combat Center, I believe is NGACC, I think is the acronym, way off in the distance. So we are often hearing them bombing, doing some artillery practice out there. And then I live down the hill, kind of on the other side of the mountain ridge over there. It's only about 10 minutes away. Pretty beautiful scenery. Not a bad place to work, huh? There is a fault, kind of off, where's my finger? Kind of off in that distance. There's a fault about a mile from here. In my first year here, that fault moved and it shook the building I was working in. It was my first earthquake. It was the most amazing thing in the world, because it didn't knock anything off the walls. It would have scared the bejesus out of me if it was any bigger. All right, so I'm gonna cover up this and we're gonna head back into the building and talk about some animals. As I'm walking back down into my office though, does anybody have any questions? I guess as you're thinking of questions, oh, go ahead. 22 Robbins, go ahead.
Yeah, didn't you say we were just going to talk about animals?
Yes.
I was curious, has there been a rare animal spotted in that park?
I think when a lot of people ask about rare animals, you guys want to know about carnivores, right? The big predators. And we don't have, I wouldn't say we have rare animals out here, but there's certainly one animal that nobody sees. They only see the results of that, like their dog or cat gets eaten or whatever. And that is a mountain lion. And I have a really great mountain lion story for you. So we do have mountain lions out here. They have really, really wide ranges. So a mountain lion needs like 80 square miles or something crazy like that of space to wander around, and they don't like to cross territories. So up in the mountains, let me see. So out my window, there's kind of some hills up there. And we do field trips for like kindergarten through second grade here in this campground. And I think it was 2 years ago, one of my rangers was bringing a group of second graders up that hill. So she's walking up the hill and she's, all right, we're gonna turn to the right here. And as she looked to the right, there was a dead mule deer carcass, like complete mule deer, head, antlers still on it, everything. And she immediately was like, all right, we're gonna get left, detoured the second graders because she didn't want them to see that kind of carnage. And when the field trip was over, she came back down and we went up and looked at it, and the gut had been completely hollowed out. So the interior of the mule deer, first of all, it was a mule deer. They're here, but we never see them. And it had a pretty good, rack on it. So it's surprising that a deer that big is still out in the desert with so many people around, we can't see them. But the interior cavity was completely hollowed out except for like a weird little gut pile in the middle, which is bizarre. So our wildlife biologist came up and put a camera out on that carcass, like a game camera. And the next morning, they went up and got the film, and they came down and we watched it with them. And it was about 15 minutes after the camera was started that the mountain lion came down and got the carcass and dragged it up the hill a little bit. So a couple wild things about that. One, there's a mountain lion literally on the boundary of the campground. Two, that mountain lion was watching that wildlife biologist set up that camera. And then three, this mountain lion, which is a third the size of the deer, was dragging a full deer up a mountainside, like over rocks and everything. So we followed that carcass for 3 days. We'd move the camera every day, and it just got smaller and smaller, and eventually, you know, we couldn't find what was left, or, you know, we just didn't follow it anymore. But that was pretty cool. That has been the first and only time I've ever been near what I've known to be mountain lion activity. And Mr. Pratt, I'll see if I can send those videos to you. They're really cool.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I was hoping I could get here to figure out a way to set them up, but they're on like a computer and not the iPad, and it's weird to go between the two different devices. But, you know, so we do have mountain lions. We don't track them here in Joshua Tree National Park. Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area, which is in Los Angeles, they do track their mountain lions. They have a lot of mountain lions out there, and they have a lot of incidents with mountain lions, you know, either coming down into populated areas or mountain lions getting hit by a car. You know, they want to try to reduce that interaction as best they can. So that's one of the main jobs of park rangers out there. But other, you know, we don't really, as far as large animals, you know, we've got coyotes, which you guys have out there, so I won't spend any time on that. We have these guys. Do you know what that's from?
Looks like a bighorn sheep.
That is a bighorn sheep, yep. So we have a solid population of desert bighorn out here in Joshua Tree National Park.
Oh, cool.
So this is the male horn, and you guys know the difference between horns and antlers, right? Horns, I always remember horns are hollow. So horns stay on an animal its entire life. There's actually like a bone inside here. And it's like hair, right? It's hair that kind of gets matted down and eventually forms this big curl. And then antlers are like fingernails that just grow on a member of the deer family's head. So deer, moose, elk, they all lose their antlers every year and grow new ones, right? And the size depends on food and nutrition, all that kind of stuff. I'm sure there's some hunters in the crowd. And then we have this guy. So, you know, this isn't necessarily a rare animal. We don't see them too much because they tend to spend 90% of their lives underground. But I've seen a couple. And these animals are really of more concern to us than just about any of the other animals in the park, because these animals, we've seen their numbers throughout the desert declining rapidly. And who knows which T word this is?
It's a turtle.
No! Oh,
A tortoise.
I knew somebody was going, yes, a tortoise, right? A tortoise. So turtles look exactly the same pretty much, and they, you know, their biology is all very similar. Their appearance is very similar. Actually, their biology is really different, and I'll tell you in a second here. Turtles have webbed feet. Tortoises have gigantic, gnarly toenails because they need to dig burrows in the ground, and they need to stay underground for most of their lifetime so that they don't dry out in the hot desert heat. And the neat thing about tortoises is tortoises have remained relatively unchanged through millions of years. You know, we have, where I used to work in Badlands in South Dakota, Badlands National Park, that park was set aside for its fossil resources. And we have tortoises out there in rock that's over 30 million years old. They're bigger than this, but other than that, nothing really has changed. You know, their skeletons are very similar. We can look at the rocks and come up with a good idea of vegetation, of water needs. Not a lot has changed. It has been, this animal is an incredibly adaptable animal. We find them in fossils in the Ice Age down in the Coachella Valley where Palm Springs is. And then we have a population up here of desert tortoise. So we monitor about 20 tortoise in the park. And we do that by putting, so this is it's a transmitter that's stuck on this tortoise shell with some basically plumber's caulk. Mr. Pratt, I totally lost track of time.
We've got a good 10 minutes.
Oh, good, okay. So this is stuck in the middle. So these parts of the shell are called scutes, S-C-U-T-E-S. The middle of the scute doesn't grow, but the outer edge does. And see how you can see those lines? That's, those are like growth rings, essentially. So if you stick something in the center of a scute, it's not going to affect the growth of the shell. So it's not going to, produce some weird, thing on the tortoise shell that might affect the survival of the tortoise. And then we don't do this anymore, but this is just the wire. We use plumber's putty to kind of stick that down on the shell. But we've long since, this shell is super old. We've long since learned that it doesn't really matter if we stick the wire down or not. But this transmitter gives off a radio signal that we can then follow and relocate a tortoise that's monitored, and annually determine, has it moved much from its burrow? Has it found a mate? Are there babies? We want to learn about the tortoise, and how it lives right now, because it's not an endangered animal yet. It is threatened. So under the Endangered Species Act, there's different levels of protection. Threatened animals, when an animal becomes listed as threatened, that's what kicks in a lot of scientific observation and study. So that should that animal end up on the endangered list, we now have knowledge to help reestablish it in different places. So we are in the data collection process of learning about the desert tortoise. The Mojave Desert is one of the last places in California where people can come out and live affordably. There's also a huge, booming retirement community out here. Year-round good weather, as is much of Southern California. So the habitat from the desert tortoise is getting just destroyed. And solar farms, we're getting a lot of solar farms out here. Not so much wind farms, but definitely a ton of solar. So we are learning about this tortoise. It says, should it ever become endangered, what can we do as scientists to help bring it back from, the brink of extinction? Now, a cool thing about the desert tortoise are the adaptations this thing has to survive no water. So if you hold up your fist, this is the size of your bladder, right? When your bladder gets filled with liquid, it sends through your nervous system, it sends a little note to your brain that you got to go to the bathroom, you got to pee. Well, the tortoise, almost half of its body is bladder. Almost half of its body, so imagine if 50% of your body, 40% actually, was bladder. That would be like your two legs filling up a pee before you had to go to the bathroom. That's pretty crazy, first of all, the size of the bladder of this thing. Now, going back to the size of your bladder, think about, just until now, or until we started this program, how many times you've gone to the bathroom today, right? So, we all go when we wake up, right? That's one. Maybe once or two more times, probably the most 3. I doubt anybody has gone to the bathroom more than 3 times already this morning. A desert tortoise may only go to the bathroom 3 or 4 times a year. Literally in 365 days, this animal may only pee or poop less than 5 times. And if you think about that waste that comes out of your body, most of it is water. Now, we would not be able to survive that, obviously. Our bodies are not adapted to surviving the concentration of waste that our cells give up, right? So we pee and we poop to get rid of the stuff that our cells don't use when we eat with the food and the materials that we drink, that we put in our bodies. We have to get rid of that, or that nasty stuff, that toxic stuff would concentrate in our bodies and it would kill us. A tortoise can almost have solid urea crystals in its blood. right? That's crazy that they can survive that. Their bodies are adapted to having such toxic blood because they don't have the moisture to eliminate that out of its body. That's what keeps an animal like that around for 30 million years, being able to have almost solid pee in its blood. That's crazy. I think that's totally nuts. So I'll show you one more thing with the rocks, because I'm a rock geek. I got into, so quick career path, I went to school for geology. I was a geology major in college and minored in secondary education. So I actually was a high school science teacher for a few years before a young 20-something me was like, can't do this anymore. So I've always loved education. I started volunteering with the Park Service, always wanted to get back into education. So I worked as a regular park ranger, information desk, leading public groups around, eventually got my master's in education and used that to get a permanent job with the National Park Service. So it is hard. You have got to be in the right place at the right time. You got to be willing to live in places nobody else wants to live. But if you're persistent and make it work, you know, it'll happen. So now I'm in Southern California. I've lived here for about 5 years. I'm originally from Virginia. My husband's originally from Michigan. We don't have any family out here, but we haven't lived around family for like 20 years. And the trade-off is living in some pretty cool places like this. But anyway, geology is my love, the heart and soul of my interest in national parks. And so the geology of Joshua Tree is what draws a lot of our visitors here. We have these huge granite batholiths that are it's a really popular climbing destination, and it's been a popular climbing destination for years. And the erosion, you know, patterns that happen out here are really cool. This is probably one of the most famous features in the park. And what does that look like to y'all?
A skull.
A skull. That is Skull Rock. So you see to me it looks like Sloth from the Goonies. There's the eyes there, there's a nose there, and it's got kind of a pointy head. But that's Skull Rock, super popular feature in the park. Really cool rocks here. Here's just one of our neat granites. And then there's also nice GNEISS. Lots of really neat stuff out here. So, you know, the natural history, the scenery is what brings most people out here, because you're not going to see a lot of animals. You know, they're not going to be out during the daytime when people are out. You might see a couple lizards and snakes. We've got like 7 different rattlesnakes, I think. I have not seen a snake in probably a year. Part of that could be that I've been housebound for, for a big chunk of that. But hey, I would love to give you guys time to answer or to ask any questions.
Well,
It could be about Joshua Tree in particular or anything.
well, Ranger Allison, I'm sure their tummies are getting pretty hungry right now. But if I could, as we wrap it up, I've got on line with us Mrs. Cummer, and she's.
I see her forehead. There we go. Hi.
And she's one of our amazing teachers. And in fact, her #1 thing on her bucket list is to visit Joshua Tree. And so when she comes to visit you, where should she go? What's the #1 spot she should visit?
You know, I would say that the first thing you should do is just drive through the park really slowly. We have a 33-mile kind of U-shaped road, and just driving through the park, you'll see a landscape that's just so different than what you see outside of the park. And it has everything to do with the geology. And when you get here, just you know, hike as many trails as you can. Get off into, excuse me, into the rocks. You know, where I work at Black Rock here is a pretty amazing spot. It's, you know, during the week, there's not as many people here. You can walk through high elevation Joshua Tree forests. There's a couple mountains you can climb up to the top and see Palm Springs on one side and Morongo Valley on the other. You get some really amazing scenic vistas. Honestly, if I would say one spot, Keys View. Keys View is the highest point in the park where you can drive and actually be at the top of a mountain and look out at a huge chunk of the park ahead of you. You can see the super populated Coachella Valley below you, and looking south, and then looking north, you see nothing but wilderness. So it's a really neat contrast of habitats, I guess, people habitat versus animal habitat. Pease View is great.
Ranger
And
Allison,
like I said, it's a huge park. You could spend weeks here and still not see all of it.
we can't thank you enough. We've enjoyed every minute of it. We want to thank you so much from Greensburg
Thank you.
High School in Greensburg, Indiana.
Does Robin 22 Robbins want to ask a quick question?
Okay.
Okay, first off, my name is Caleb, and
Hi, Caleb.
hello. I was curious. Apparently there was this article that they were saying like there was some sort of vandalism at the park. I was kind of curious about that.
Yes, so because we are so populated, the area around us is incredibly populated. Anytime we've had to shut down the park recently for government shutdowns, people don't care. They try to break through the gates. They'll drive around the gates. People can be jerks. Luckily, it's the few versus the many. But when there is a tree that's knocked down or spray paint that's happened on rocks, it's in highly visible places because those jerky people don't want to wander off the trail either. So yeah, we are constantly dealing with probably our biggest issue right now, other than just people going off trail and tramping plant life, is spray painting. You know, cutting down Joshua trees isn't that big of a thing, but spray painting, tagging rocks, that kind of stuff is graffiti. That kind of graffiti is a big deal right now.
Wow, that's terrible. Mm.
And we have ways of cleaning it up. There's actually a material called elephant snot that we use to cover up the graffiti rather than try to like sandblast it off, because sandblasting it off will hamper the surface of the rock. So, I mean, we take our preservation seriously. We want to get rid of the spray paint or at least cover it up without destroying as much of the natural surface as we can.
That's awesome. Well, once again, thank you so much. We really
Thank you guys. It was great to talk to you all. It was nice to finally meet you, Mr. Pratt.
nice to
Nice to meet you too, Mrs. Comer.
Have a great day.
All right, you too. Enjoy your week off next week, or your break anyway.
See you guys on Friday.
All right.